wondered how was the independence of Kenya? How did Kenyans live it? What were the antecedents of this success? What process do they pass? What consequences independence of Kenya lead to? Well, if you want to know, stay with us. In this documental, we will explain it all to you.
Located in the continent of Africa, Kenya covers 569,140 square kilometers of land and 11,277 square kilometers of water, making it the 49th largest nation in the world with a total area of 580,367 square kilometers.
A part of Eastern Africa, the territory of what is now Kenya has seen human habitations since the beginning of the Lower Paleolithic. The Bantu expansion from a West African center of dispersal reached the area by the first millennium of our era. The Independent Republic of Kenya was formed in 1964. It was ruled as the one of the facto one-party state by the Kenya African National Union (KANU). It was an alliance led by Jomo Kenyatta during 1963 to 1978.
In 1890, German and British agreed on a distribution of the control over East. The territory of Kenya passes into the hands of English. First, we have to note that the type of government established in Kenya was the colonial system, dependent of the state. The governor and the official of the secretary were elected by London. The majority of Africans remained under the command of their own leaders, according to the advice and general supervision of a British official. In 1844, the African Union of Kenya (KAU) was founded, an anti-colonialist interval organization that focused on claims of the Kikuyu. That was a tribe around a amount of Kenya that has a lot of political and economical influence in this country. The African Union of Kenya organized strict and peaceful protests on the cities. From October of 1952 to December of 1959, the Mau Mau Rebellion, that was a guerrilla organization of Kenyan insurgents that fought against the British Empire during the period of 1952 to 1960, fought against British colonial law. In 1952, massive revolts broke out under the command of the Mau Mau Secret Society in response to attack of the property and life of the settlers. In 1953, the colonial administration declared the state of emergency. The political parties were outlawed, the main national leaders were arrested, Kenyatta among them, and thousands of Kikuyu were sent to the concentration camps. After this rebellion, the British allowed the Africans to participate more and more in the governmental process. In order to cut off the support for the rebels, the first direct election of Africans in the Legislative Council took place in 1957.
Independence began in the 1950s with the Mau Mau Rebellion. But what is the Mau Mau Rebellion? Well, the Mau Mau movement was a militant African nationalist group that opposed British colonial rule and its exploitation of the native population.
Mau Mau members made up primarily of Kikuyu, the largest ethnic group in Kenya, carried out violent attacks against colonial leaders and white settlers. In 1952, the colonial government declared a state of emergency and arrested many Kenyan independent leaders, including moderates who had little or no connection to the Mau Mau, like Jomo Kenyatta, president of the Kenya African Union. Between 1952 and 1956, the British defeated the Mau Mau through a brutal campaign of military action and widespread detention of the Kikuyu. However, the Mau Mau Rebellion also persuaded the British that social, political, and agrarian reforms were necessary. In 1957, the British allowed for the first direct elections of native leaders to the Legislative Council, and by 1960, Africans were a majority in the council. Over the next several years, the British worked with African and white settler leaders to plan the country's transition to independence. Then, finally, Kenya gained its independence from Britain on December 12, 1963, with Jomo Kenyatta as the country's first prime minister. The Union Jack was replaced by the black, red, and green flag of the new nation. This followed the first all-inclusive elections on May 27, 1963, and a year later, Kenya was declared a republic.
The independence of Kenya was rapid since it lasted from 1920 to 1962. Politically as early as 1953, the citizens' government imposed a new idea in the colonies, which was to ensure the participation of exercise of power for each community, regardless of its numbers, guaranteeing the evolutions of executive and legislative councils that became fully democratically eligible reforms. Kenya was mediated by white minorities who did not want to lose privileges. The balanced mode of representations prevailed, where a white community benefited for an influence equal to all the others gathered together. The idea was the inability of Aborigines to participate in political life without first having led the local issues were admitted. The only innovation was the idea that economical and social developments should be a preliminary steps for political promotions, but interest always slowed down the path of progress. In the absence of Kenyatta, a young of low origins, Tom Mboya, becomes the leader of the opposition to colonialism. With the pressures of this on their back and their entitled people of Kenya calling over their release of Jomo Kenyatta, that this time was in how power quickly escapes the hands of Europeans as the white population saw therein their power. The UN, the United Nations, adopted the declarations guaranteeing independence in the colonial countries, and the United States, with Kennedy, advocated a policy that Africa should be for Africans.